Okay, anybody model the whole thing? Yeah, okay. So feel free to take a look at the screen now. So I'm going to go through two really quick ways you could have done like the fundamental model. And on Google, I've just gone ahead and prepared these dimensions for myself. So this is to 50 feet. I'm going to do an extrusion of 625 feet to 16 stories above that, 200 feet, 300 feet, 250 feet. So you can just sort of know those dimensions ahead of time, whatever. But I'm going to go ahead and start with the, what was it, 225 feet by 225 foot base. I'm going to go up that initial height. I already forgot. 25. So I'm going to go up 625 feet. And once I'm up here, the shape is sort of like cutting off the outside edges, right? So I can cut in 75 feet, give myself an endpoint there, and then come in 75 feet. The same on this side. Of course, you could just make a 75 foot by 75 foot square in that direction. And then I'm going to grab this guy. What was it, 200 feet from here? And then again, cut inwards here. That guy up, it goes 300 feet. And then the final thing, I think, was just grab a two-sided edge there. What was the distance? 250. So that will give you a sort of a rough conceptual model there, right? Another way you could have done it was start with a 75 foot by 75 foot thing, and then go up one at a time, and then just put them next to each other, but make sure to make them groups, right, so they don't stick to each other. So hopefully you've gotten to this point here. Let me go ahead and ask you to triple click this and make it a group, so it's sort of its own piece, and just leave that, however far you got to, leave it there the whole time. Imagine your architect just gave you this and it's like, okay, this is my design, and show me some structure for this, right? So like you start thinking about the design. But one thing I'm going to do now is set up a couple of layers, because we're going to be using layers in this session here. So you might have had some little windows floating around on your screen. If you don't, go to Window on the top, and you should be able to select the windows you want to be floating around. So I'm talking about the Layers window right now, this one right here. And by default, everything falls into a layer called Layer 0, and it's a selected layer, so that's just sort of like everything goes in that layer, and you can't delete this layer, you can't turn off this layer, but you can make as many extra layers as you want. And then these layers become sort of, you can assign any object into one of these layers, and then you can sort of check off and check on to make it disappear temporarily. So this is really useful to think categorically about all the things you want. So let's say this is the architectural model, and we want this to be around, but not always something you see. I would make an extra layer, call it architecture, or whatever you want. And then what you do to assign a group or an object to a layer is you select it, you bring up the entity info window, which you can do by just right-clicking and hitting entity info. It's the very first option. And you can see that on this screen, it has a layer element. So this is actually sort of like almost the easiest BIM. Like these objects do have a little bit of knowledge around them. And so you can select architecture as its layer. And that just means that when you select out of everything, you can uncheck the architecture layer and it goes away. Okay. So this will become very helpful if you want to separate architecture, structure, MEP, even individual aspects like columns, beams, concept 1, concept 2, the site terrain, people, whatever. So I would start keeping layers in mind as another way to organize things besides just making groups and components. Okay. So now let's follow along. I'm going to do another version of this Willis tower, but it's going to be more structurally minded. Okay. First thing I'm going to do is right on the side, I'm just going to make that 75 foot by 75 foot rectangle on the ground. And I'm going to lift it up only the height of 1 story. So in my case, it was 12.5 feet. If you want to use whatever you were using before, you feel free to do that or switch over to 12.5. But all I have right now is this cube, which is just 1 bay, 1 ceiling height up, or 1 floor height up. Okay. Once you've got that, triple click it or grab the whole thing, make it a component. Very, very important to make a component here. once you've had this, so you can imagine this as the air volume of one of these spaces. Now make the entire floor plate. So you can use the clone tool with the move command. I find that to be absolutely the easiest, especially if they're touching each other. So I'm just going to move from corner to corner and click Control, halfway in there. And so I know for a fact that these pieces are touching each other because I snapped a point which I know geometrically exactly where it needs to be. And then right from here, I can X2, and it's made 3 of them, right? So you start to think about the quickest steps to get where you want. And then from here, I select all 3 of them, either select them individually or drag over the whole thing. And then I'm going to clone in the other direction. Again, snapping from a corner to a corner, which will be exactly the 75-foot vector you need. X2. Okay. I want to see everyone get to at least this point here. 9 different objects. Each of them is the sort of 75 by 75 by 12.5. Go through it one more time. Make a rectangle. Click once, type in 75 feet by 75 feet. Click Enter. Switch to the push-pull command. Click once, drag it upwards, type in 12.5 feet. Switch back to the arrow command. Triple-click the object, right-click, make component. Click Create. Select the object if it isn't already. Switch to the Move command. Activate the clone tool with the Control or Command. Drag or click once on one corner and click again on the next corner. X2. Switch back to the arrow key. Select all 3 of them. Switch to the Move command. Activate the clone tool. And then do corner to corner. X2. A component is something where now when I double click on one and start to edit it, all of them move. If you just did groups, then each of them would be unique. Okay, if you've gotten to this point, then select all of them. And I'm basically going to do the exact same process as I showed with the original form. So I'm just going to move this floor plate up, but now I have to clone it. So this is where the the multiplication aspect of cloning is really helpful. So you don't have to move 50 times, right? Because all we've got are air volumes now. You're going to go upwards 12 foot 6 inches as the individual clone command. And I'm actually going to type in X49 because there was already one, and we're going to make 49 more, right? And that should instantly make all of these. Okay. Sure. So you got the 9 pieces on the ground. You select all 9 of them. Switch to the Move command. Activate Clone. And I'm just going to trace. I'm going to click at the bottom of this corner and then up to the top, which will create the 12 foot 6 inch vector upwards. I don't even have to type in anything. I just go from edge to edge. You'll see them highlight as purple.
So how do the clone? How do you activate the clone?
Once you have the cursor shown as the Move tool, then just press Control or Command. And what you'll actually see is a little plus sign show up on the bottom right of the cursor. You can toggle back and forth. Yeah. Okay. And then I go upwards, corner to corner. That's the 12.5 foot command. Click to actually create the second object, and then immediately type in X49. And if you screw up that number, remember you can sort of keep revising that as long as you don't do any other commands. Okay. How many people are at this step here? Okay. Anybody have trouble getting here? Okay. Now from here to do the next step doesn't involve any extra tweaking. Just select the pieces you want to clone, right? So I'm just going to go in. I'm going to hold Control or Command. I don't know what it is on Mac, but to select multiple objects, go in and select the ones you want of the previous floor plate. It's going to be this figure 8 shape. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing. Now we want 16 stories of this, right? So I'm going to go in, go upwards, and type in 16. Exactly the same command. All that's changed is really literally just the number you type in after X. Okay. When you get to this point, Go back to your arrow command and now just select across. And this one goes up to, you got 24 of these floors. Back to the move command. You can use any 12.5 foot vertical line you see in the space to do your move, just whatever is most convenient right in front of you. Make sure you're still cloning. X24 gets me that. And finally, just 2 pieces. And I think the final one here is just 20 of them. And you should have a model which is now exactly the same size as your original shell, but has a lot more information in it. And that's information that's going to be really helpful for the next thing we're doing. So let's try to get to this step. Feel free to also grab the whole thing, make it a group, just so you can move it around easily. And then even make a new layer for it, right? Call it whatever you want.
How many floors is in the last one with the 2?
I think it's 20. Now note that the height might not be exactly what you expected it to be. We didn't really account for those double-heighted floors. Let's actually try to do that right now. Let's assume that in this building there might be some double-heighted floors, which would be a different component, right? And we can notice it. Let's just only deal with it at the top for now, just to simplify the example. You can see in this image here, like those top 2 mechanical floors, whether they're executive suites or it's entirely utilities, looks like it's about twice as high. So what we want to do is grab those 4 pieces at the very top of your model. You do that just from the side and select them like I've got here. And I want to divorce them from their sort of clone master, right? But if I can keep them cloned to each other, that'd be great as well. And I'm going to change these into just taller pieces. So if you have all 4 selected, or even just one, you right click. You see a option here that says make unique. So it's going to like turn these into their own clan that clone each other, but not to the original. Okay. To do that, to verify that that was the case, you can go into one of them and just start going crazy at it. You'll see that all 4 of those are changing, but the original, however many you made, stay the same. Whereas if you go and double click on any of the ones you made before and try to change those, same is true, right? But then the top 4 are now different. Okay, does that make sense? So what we can do is come to these guys right here. I'm just going to make one of them double-heighted, 12.5 feet. And now all of them are double-heighted. And then what you can do is sort of the final 2 up one because they were sort of in the wrong place to begin with. So now you've got 4. You can imagine 2 floors that are unique or sort of thought of as a different repetitive element than the others. So you can have that happen or not. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to go right back to what it was. Does that ever happen with Glenn? Yes. What does he do? I want to make sure everyone gets to that point. So. The bottom corner of the top corner, that's going to make exactly the height. And make sure. And then click X.
Yeah.
Okay. So does everyone at least have some of the tower created with the individual components? Just make sure you have like a bunch of them so you can see the next part. Okay, so here's going to be the sort of beautiful thing that happens. So if you made it a group, you can leave it a group. I'm just going to explode it just for now. It doesn't really matter. I'm going to select one of them, any one of them, because of course they're all the same, right? I'm just going to put one off to the side. I'm doing this right now just with the move with the clone, but you can just Control C, Control V, whatever. Just have it off to the edge. Imagine you wanted to just inspect one piece at a time. You know what the overall building looks like, but I'm just going to focus on one repetitive element. And we know this piece is repetitive because if you go to the document and you look at this, these floor plans, these specifically show a little bit more detail. But you'll notice the whole point of the structural system, as Sarkeesian is definitely going to like obsess over for this one lecture, 183. So it's a bundled tube system. You've got perimeter columns around each of these 75 feet. And then at those key points where you saw the truss work, that's like where it becomes rigid across all of them. So like a bundled column, as you saw in 81 as well. Really stiff. So actually, each of these, theoretically, and we don't know for sure yet, but this is an overgeneralization, this could be exactly the same column sizes, right? Like that one is the same as that one, potentially it's the same as that one. Each of these corners could be potentially the same. Might not be exactly, but that roughly is like the right size, right? And then you can think of a floor plate being exactly the same thickness no matter where you are. So we can literally take that original component, and if we design that to be what we want, it's going to automatically do that for the whole building now that we've created the structure. So let's just see what that looks like. Well, if you double click on this, just make it a dummy one on the outside. And just start going whack with it. You can convince yourself that it is in fact matched to everything you've done before, right? You go, and actually what I want you to do is delete all the faces. So all you have is the wireframe box. And it should do the same for the whole model. So imagine how long this would have taken if you weren't using any Control C, Control V, right? Or components, if you decided to change your mind later. So what you've got now, essentially, and what you could do is come back into this component so that you can sort of select the individual lines and actually grab all these lines and make it its own group. So now you're going to make like a group inside of a component. You can do nested groups and components as far down as you want. But once you select that, the right click might be hard. Just make sure you're right on top of the line. And if you make that a group, and that's, you're never going to accidentally screw up the grid. Just think like in the model, once you've gotten to this design phase, like this grid is the grid, it's not going to change. If it does change, all I have to do is change one of these grids, right? And then what I'm going to do just for myself is I'm going to create a layer called grid. I'm going to right click on that group I created, go to its entity info, and just put that into the grid box. So what does that mean now? Actually, I'm also going to completely line up the original model with, let's screw it up. Was it a little off? I just wrong. But this is just to illustrate a concept here of, these are now superimposed directly on top of each other. But I can just get rid of the architecture model, right? And so now what I can do is I can get rid of the grid, and I can show just the architecture. I can show both the architecture and the grid. I can get rid of the shell and just show the grid, right? So now back, yeah.
Can you show how you like the layer box?
Yeah.
Where that is.
So under Window, you just select toggle layers, and this should just immediately pop up somewhere. I just keep it off to an edge. Yeah, and then to make a new layer is this little plus sign here.
Are we making a new one?
Yeah, because you'll see how useful this is later. But so again, this component actually has a group inside of it, which is the the 12 lines, right?
Can you repeat the layer stuff?
Yeah. So then if I get rid of the grid layer, actually, I'll just make a new layer here. So once you're in this window, click the plus sign. We'll make a new one. You could call it whatever you want. Click enter. And that just means that now, when you select any object in your space, you can look at its entity info. If you don't have this window open, just right-click on the object and select entity info. And then on its drop-down menu under layer, you can select which layer it goes into. Okay. So now there's a billion things we can do. Remember, we're in the component right now, so anything you make is going to be instantly duplicated like 1,000 times, however many you made, right? If you want to just test this, like just make any object like now, once you're in the component, like make a square, and you'll notice that it's made it every single time, right? Just think literally about these things as clones. Right? So of course we don't really want that piece right now. Well, now let's make some structure here. So let's make columns on the edges. And I don't know how big these corner columns are, but let's just assume they're square 3 foot by 3 foot members. Okay, super simplified. But what you're going to want to do then is create a 3 foot by 3 foot column, lift it up 12.5 feet, and position it so that it's directly on top of this corner grid, which means that its center of that square needs to sit right on this corner. So when you use the rectangle command, you can't create a rectangle from the center like you can with a circle. Actually, you might be able to with a polygon tool. But usually I just make the thing and I just move it in to where it needs to be. Kind of like that module exercise where you move the cube up halfway. So I'm going to do that right now on my screen. You can follow along. I'm going to make a 3 foot by 3 foot column, or a rectangle on the ground. I'm going to lift it up 12.5 feet. I don't have to type because I can just grab onto one of these edges I have. Instantly make that a component. So things that flash in your mind. As soon as you make anything that you might have more than one of them in your model, instantly make it a component. You don't even have to be done with the step. Okay? And now that it's a component, I'm going to do this in basically just 2 steps. I'm going to move a midpoint on an edge over to the actual point so that it's halfway there. And then I'm going to move the other midpoint over to get in line with that. So now if I look at it from the bottom, it's sitting right in the center. 12.5 feet. That's our module size. Yeah.
So usually you always, like, once you make something, make it a component, and then you can make a group in the component. Like make a subgroup in that component.
Yeah, you can always make additional groups inside of.
Okay, is that the way to go instead of group then component?
You don't. So you can go directly to a component, directly to a group for a given object.
Yeah.
Once you've made a component, it's not so easy to go back to a group.
Okay.
You have to like select one and say make it unique.
Okay.
If you have a group, you can make it into a component. You'll just see that option still available when you right click. But just know ahead of time. Basically, like in a building, if you have any repeatable element, make it a component. If you got like a sculpture, like a statue of David or something, make that a group because you're not going to have 2 of those in the same building. Okay. So once you have the super column placed in the right position, it's going to be actually very easy to make 4 of these, because now all you have to do is use the move clone tool and go from corner to corner of your grid system, right? Because that's already been set up for you of all the right dimensions. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that big column, and I click the move command. I'm going to toggle clone. I'm just going to almost don't even think about the object. Just look back at your grid and just go from corner to corner. Okay. Of course, you don't have to clone here because there's just going to be 4 of these in one module. And I'm going to select both of those and then move clone them to the back edge. Okay. Everyone feel comfortable with concept there? Another thing, I've got 3 foot by 3 foot rectangle. I'm going to lift it up 12.5 feet. So now I've got a piece. Triple click it, make it a component. I'm going to get it so that it sits in line with my vertical grid. That just involves moving it to 2 half lengths or half widths. And then I'm going to take that whole thing and I'm going to clone it over to the other vertical line. I've just grabbed one and then moved it over here with the move command. And then I'm going to grab both of them now, just to make it quicker, and move it over to the back. Okay. And let's say you wanted to make the minor columns as well. If you're catching up, feel free to skip this step. But let's just assume that the other columns, they're spaced 25 feet apart. Are they? 5. Okay, 15 feet apart. Really quick way to do this is you just want to get the spacing right here. Just move one of your existing columns over 15 feet. And then X4. And then we want these to be different types of columns, right? So I'm going to grab the 4 columns I just made. I'm going to right click, make them unique. And now I can come in and trim them down a little bit. So that right now they're 3 feet by 3 feet. I can just come in and trim on either side 1 foot. Just make sure you're sort of faithful to the location it's at. Got smaller columns. And now note that you've got 2 separate components working here now. You've got your fat columns, which are all linked to each other. And you've got your mini columns that are all linked to each other. Now I can actually grab these 4. And I can clone rotate off of a corner here to quickly get an adjacent side, right? You can do the same twice here. So hopefully you guessed by now that like some crazy shit has happened on the other one, right? So let's zoom out. With very little work, you've created lots and lots of stuff, right? Because all of them were linked together. What we have now is essentially cons like bundled tube structure, right? Without any beams, but of course you could do the same with the girders and then with your slab. You come all the way in, you can even see that it's sort of faithful to the edges here. You can bring back the architecture grid to see it more clearly. Pretty cool. Is it crashing anyone's computer? Like a surefire way to tell how bad your CPU is if this crashes.
Could you go over again how to make the second set of components?
Sure. Of course, I just, there's an infinite number of ways to do it. But to save time, I had a piece that was, I had a fat column that was already sort of in line with the grid, so I moved that over 15 feet with the clone tool. And right away, you can make that one unique. So I'm starting a whole new family of columns. Trim that down 1 foot on either side of it with the push-pull, just to shrink it down to 1 foot. Of course, you could just start entirely over with a 1 foot by 1 foot rectangle, lift it up, make it a completely new component, and just get it in place. But this was just a quick way to get them all 15 feet apart. Okay. Feel comfortable with that? Let's also make a slab element. For slab element, just like, let's say, of course, you don't want to place unnecessary amounts of slab elements because, one floor is going to be the other person's ceiling. So just assume that your module only needs to show 1 at the bottom or the top. I would just put it on the top. Quickly put this back together. Okay. You can also grab all your beams you've made, not including the grid, and then put those under a layer. I'm going to make a new layer that's just called structure or frame, whatever. I'm going to put all the columns in the structure layer. Look, I've selected many, many objects, and they're all going to go into the structure folder at the same time. Okay. Now I'm going to make my slab. I mean, technically the slab could go off to the edge of this column, but I'll just make it on the inside for now. And we'll go down 1 foot. Again, just make a random assumption right now. The sandwich is certainly bigger than the real thing. Make that. Now, in a given component, we're not going to have two of these. So here's like a case where you could just make it a group. And then that, I can go make another layer, call it floor, and then place it into the floor layer. So you go back to your actual structure, and you can see it's got a lot of detail now. And hopefully, if you send this back to your architect, and like they gave you, what did they give you? They gave you just this, right? They literally could have just been making things up at this point. And trust me, they will just make things up, like in this point of it. And you sort of look at it a little bit, you start putting a grid to it, you find some repetitive modules, you start adding some basic structure to remind them that there's such thing as columns and beams and so forth. And you send them back this, and they're going to be like, wow, like not only is it nice to know, but I even understand my own design better now and sort of its limitations, right? And like I just showed, you can get rid of different pieces. You look at, for example, just the mass floors. It has this cool strobe effect just because of the graphics. This might be an easy way to think about total square footage of your space. If the architect can't do math, then you can help them estimate the square footage. Right? Look at just the grid again if you want to revise things like that. Now, of course, there's a lot of limitations to this. If you wanted to change your overall floor height, that's not going to be so easy, right? Because everything was sort of placed in space at 12.5 feet. But in every other direction, and for a lot of the little tweaks you'll be making after the grid set, this is pretty helpful to do. I would recommend you utilizing some of these component strategies when you're actually interacting with your architect, because again, it shows you a lot about the way buildings are designed. I like SketchUp and the sort of hacky way to do this because it really shows you, how a complex building is made up of really just like one part, right? Of course, there's more than this, but if we laid out every unique floor plan and then the shear wall, the core, different facade elements, you'd maybe have like 20 different unique things that would generate the whole building. So that's just in general a good way to think about buildings. Okay, I've got 15 minutes. Hopefully that was helpful just to sort of see how that happens. I think I'm recording this. Yes, I am. So if you want to review it, I'll put it on YouTube or something. But let's look at the assignment really quickly. So what I mean here by follow Derek's example is just to think about it more as a repetitive module. So assignment 2 is to choose any tower. Obviously, don't choose the Sears Tower, but choose either something that SOM did or anything cool you see built or to be built. Gauge it to your level of how much time you want to spend on it. So if it looks like it has crazy curves, not good for SketchUp. But if it's sort of a simple geometric shape with truss work or whatever, then definitely try to choose that. I'm going to actually take over this one, so you can't use this one. But I just want to show you a way to think about this conceptually, because once it gets harder than the Willis Tower, even that first step might be a little bit hard, right? So this building looks pretty complicated. Looks like interesting truss work, and it might even be hard to conceptualize right now. What does the floor plan look like here? We can tell it's got like a huge bottom lobby area. When it comes to your designs, your architects are often going to want to create an entrance condition, which is really grand, and it's very common for the lobby height to be double. It's just going to cause a lot of problems for you structurally, right? Depending on how much lateral system they're willing to show at that point. And then the building goes up a couple more, but as I was trying to think about how to model this, I just started searching for this tower on Google Images. Typed in SOM Towers Seoul. And I looked through the images just to see if anything would cue me into sort of the driving concept. And I saw this. This is a brilliant image, right? Hopefully your architects are genius enough to like make their concept this simple. But all it is this. And then you rotate two of them 45 degrees and you got the shape, right? So this is almost telling you exactly how to make it in SketchUp. Let's just go through that really quickly. Let's just assume, I'm going to make gross estimates here, but let's say the bottom is 200 feet by 200 feet. Okay. Let's say that that lobby height is like, let's say each story is 10 feet for now. And let's say the lobby height is 3 stories high. I'm just going to make 30 feet. Okay. And then let's say that after that, each of these sections is 33 stories tall, so it's going to be 330 feet. So at the end of the day, you got 100 stories in the building, right? So with the push-pull tool, you can actually use the clone as well. Forgot to tell you guys that, but that just sort of starts over from there. I'm gonna type in 330 feet, and I'm just gonna, that you can't really multiply, so I'm just gonna do it 2 more times. 330 feet, 330 feet. Okay. So theoretically, I'm at this point, right? Get rid of the bases too, but now I'm going to think about this term, because obviously once we've gone to this term, some new things have shown up here. I'm pretty sure that if I just grabbed, I'm going to make a center point on the top, which would just be like the midpoint of this. So if I just grabbed this piece and turned it, it would start doing some sort of weird things, right? And it would not be exactly what I wanted. So what I realized is that as this turns, you actually have some diagonals you need to create, first of all, which are all tilting the same direction. So I'm going to make those diagonals first. Each of them is going to turn in the same direction. I'm just going to go around and do this. This I can't tell you for each of the other towers. You just got to sort of think about it a little bit. But once you have that, and then actually in the next floor, it's the opposite direction. If you're familiar with the Bank of China Tower, pretty similar concept. It's just, the more symmetrical your rotations. I mean, it's stupid to be making twists in towers anyway, but if you're going to do it, like, make it symmetrical. And then get the final one in that direction. Okay, so again, this is more like what the architecture student would be doing, right? But we get to this point. Now I'm going to grab this floor here. I'm going to do it simply just by dragging. I know I've got the whole thing just because I know how that tool works. I've got nothing else too, because I didn't bound any other object. Right, so I only have the 4 lines on the surface. And then I'm going to use the rotate tool up here because it's normal to it, right? So this is the right rotation axis. I'm going to turn clockwise, 45 degrees. Okay. And I'm going to grab the top here and rotate that as well, 45 degrees. Should have the actual shape. Right? That's as simple as the concept is, at least at a mega structure, right? So of course, when you're thinking about the structural engineering, what are the very first things you're going to engineer? Like besides your slab, like these huge things, right? Because you want to give the architect a sense of, is this like 12 inches by 12 inches like they probably think it is? Or is it like 5 feet by 5 feet to have, the beam column effect, right? So that gets you to this. Now, how do you make floors, right? Floors are really easy here. Not so easy here, and you're really not going to be able to take advantage of the repetitive nature here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to first make this a group, just so that it's sort of on its own for now. I'm going to use this tool called intersect with face. And I'm just going to show it to you what it looks like. But I'm going to make an overly sized flat plane on the ground. And I'm going to then slice this piece later on. But then I'm going to build this up the story height. Actually, I can go 20 feet, 30 feet at the start because there's no floor there. But every other floor is going to be 10 feet high. What I'm doing is I'm move cloning, locking to the blue axis, typing in 10 feet. And right from here, I can go x99, I think. Okay. So I've basically just, I can only think of a video game reference here, but like some like laser EMP thing that just shuts everything off. And then it's much bigger than you need. So now you just want the parts of this that intersect your original model, or whatever, it intersects anything in the space. What you do is you select, move the Sears Tower over a little bit. Entire thing you got here. Right click, and there's another, we haven't even looked through most of these, but another one's called intersect faces with model. Honestly, you can't ever remember the difference between these, but just try one of them. And it looks like nothing happened, but you can come in and shave off the parts of this you don't need. Just think of like cookie cutter, like shave off the parts you don't need. And then I can take the original piece off. Now we've got that form, right? All individual mass floors. Now somebody asks you, what does like the 95th tower floor look like? Turns out it looks like an octagon, right? So like this again tells you a lot about your structure or your concept. And this, of course, is a nightmare for architecture because when you do your construction documents, every floor plan is essentially different, right? At least past the halfway point. So think about the consequences of crazy shapes. From here, I can make this a group, right? I can copy this one and just make a version of this which is just the structure. So now I can go in and sort of delete all my unnecessary parts here. This is just going to help me communicate to my architect, well, you've given me this form. I'm showing you that it's composed of a mega structure, floors, and then sort of intermediate structure. And then we can actually look online for what that intermediate structure looks like, and that's part of what you'll have to engineer for your team. But in the building itself, it's got actually like diagonal components and vertical components that make up the glazing and are sort of intermediate gravity columns. So that's like another whole layer you can add to this, right? But now you've got 3 parts. You can make them all different layers. You can put them within each other. So this could be your shell. Oops. You can do whatever you want with that. And so what would be a repeatable module here? How could you use the components? I mean, in one sense, this bottom third of it's the same as the top third, right? The middle, you could theoretically flip it, but that's not going to be exactly accurate for you probably. You could certainly make each of these diagonal things a repetitive module and just flip it here. And then you sort of set up your initial frame to be in this direction, and you can even set up a dummy one out here, which is straight up, but then it'll sort of fix everything to the right angle out here. So you could use exactly the same logic as we did before. You can make an entire curtain wall, triangular, a module, and just detail that a lot, or have your architect detail just one piece, and then it just multiplies itself. So there's still, even with I mean, hopefully every tower has at least one thing that repeats. And that's a place you can use components, right? And definitely within here, you got to think about your core system. If you've got like a concrete shear wall around your elevators and all kinds of things. One more final thing, I've got like 7 minutes, is I'm going to show one more feature which will be helpful. It's a section plane. With either of these objects. One more thing that's not commonly used, so it's only in tools, you go all the way down to section plane. And section plane will literally make this cut in your entire field in a direction. So what happens is when you click on it, you get this strange green force field that right now is just facing downwards. But as soon as you hover over another plane, it's going to look at that. And then the direction of those arrows at the corner is showing what's going to remain visible afterwards. You're going to cut everything behind that and act as if you just started facing that and we're looking at a section drawing. So let's say we want to make a section in this direction. You just click once, and then it instantly explodes that green force field into an orange one, which cuts everything that's to the extent that you've modeled. You can section plane just an individual part, but you have to do it from within a group or within a component. But this will just do it to your entire space. And then you can select that object itself, the plane itself. But when you are out of it, it looks orange. When you select it, it looks blue. You can, and this is really important, you can make it its own layer, because often you'll want to keep it where it is, but it's like really distracting and it's always in your way when you want to do things. So I would usually put a section plane that you want to keep in the section layer, and you can turn it off when you don't need it. But notice that when you turn off the layer, it still has made the cut, right? So when you right click on a section plane, you can specify whether it's active or not. So let me move the section plane just so that it's a little more effective. You move it just like you would move anything else. It's already confined to its own axis. So just use the move command, click once, and then go however far in you want to go. So this is really helpful because, especially for the Korean tower we made, you go right to the halfway point and learn a lot about what it looks like from the side, right? Get right to where you want to go. You can see it's got that shape to it. Even the Sears Tower, you learn a lot about what's the largest continuous lateral system I could possibly design here, right? Or where do my elevators go up to? So once you've actually populated your model with lots of things, the architects love to this because then they can quickly make their section drawings. But it's going to be really helpful for engineers as well. And let's make this non-active. Let's make another section plane. You can make as many as you want. Note that this is one of the things that actually will crash your computer. Now you can go all the way down through, and this is a great way to experience the Sears Tower because you can almost imagine it being built from the ground up and see right where it sort of switches to a different floor plane. And then same with the Korea Tower, you can see how it's changing as you go up. So these are really helpful, just conceptual models. Okay. So your assignment is, so notice I made 3 separate things really for each of these. I had a shell, which is just imagine that's just the envelope. Would eventually you could make it transparent as your curtain wall, right? You guys know how to use materials, by the way? Let's say I'm grabbing just my mass model. Go to your paint bucket. Fill in materials. You can introduce your own images if you want, but usually I just use translucent and the blue or the gray, whatever. But now it's sort of translucent. You've got your shell. That's its own layer. I want you to actually put that in a layer. Call it whatever you want. Make one that's just your major structure. So major columns, beams. Basically, it should just be your grid, right? And then make one which is the floors. And that's the bare minimum. Of course, if you want to really understand the building you see online, you can try to do as much detail as you'd like, but save yourself a lot of time by strategically deciding what's the repeatable element. Try to pick a tower that lets you exercise that. I'd say most of the examples I've linked to here are pretty good. They're really beautiful towers. They tend to have nice diagrids or things like that, so you can play with that. You can show a lot of interesting stuff in the structure layer. So the bare minimum, 3 layers: shell, floors, structural frame. Identify a repetitive element and put it off to the edge, just like I showed here. Incredibly helpful here. You can even come all the way out here and lay out your W shapes at some point, right? This is like all the different members I need for my takeoff. And just to organize your thoughts, your plane is infinite, so you can do as much as you want. Okay, and then do one section plane, just make it, put it in its layer as well, and just place it at a location where it tells you something important about your structure. And that's going to be a critical segue into talking about mass stand next time. Because what really happens here, as you can imagine, is you've gotten your model, you've sort of schooled your architect partner on like what the real structure is. You might have even suggested changes in the form so that it lines up with really nice edges, where your structure should be. I had to do that in a big way with my tower because, if I can find it really quickly, my architects came back with this. I was like, okay, that looks cool. It looks like it's from Star Trek, but there's no floors in this. It's really hard to make real floors. Like what kind of office has a Lego out there, right? So the first thing I did is I just communicated with this. I just put the mass floors in. I did the intersect with faces. I put some structure to it and said, hey, you've got like 1 billion different curved members, and they're all going to have to be different sizes. It's going to be a headache for me and for you to detail this. So think about simpler objects. I even suggested just making like an Eiffel Tower because that's really what they were trying to do with Star Trek style. And then I showed them, the floor area. I told them, these are really, really tough floors to program if you're going to put offices, and this is your overall square footage. You're way below what you need to be. So it was a critical part of that first response to architecture, which is like your first chance to shine in 183 once you get back their concept. All right, so to think about it just as much about you understanding it as you communicating it back. Once they've done that, then probably the very first thing you're going to calculate, and we'll talk about this in future classes, is like what's your biggest member, right? Like I said before, if you've got right here, the first thing we calculated were the legs, because those were just like entire buildings of their own, just filled with concrete. And that's just going to give them a reality check. How big is this member? How many bolts do you need to deal with the shear force on the bolts? If it's 10 bolts, it makes sense. If it's 100 bolts, tell them that's a problem, right? Because that's just realistically not going to happen. So we're going to talk about how to get to that thinking by making a section through the lateral system, which is typically where you reach these critical forces and moments. Okay. So also, if you need mass stand help, make sure you review what you did in 181.
Is that your final design on the right? The schematics were on the left?
Yes. This ended up being a nightmare because I tried as much as possible to get these points to line up to a floor so that detail-wise you don't see like a random connection like right in front of you. So I also, the engineers started to help a lot with the sort of funicular form that they were trying to go with. So there was a lot of dialogue there. But if you had no language to speak or you had no tools to work with, they're pretty much going to drive the concept and you're going to just be able to receive it, right? But if you feel just as competent in the tool they're using, then you're going to be right up to speed actually driving the design. Any final questions? Is the assignment clear? Hopefully it's not too challenging. I mean, you can literally get away with doing almost nothing here. You pick like an easy building. But I definitely want to see those key concepts. It's more about the concept. Cool. So like I said before, I'm going to stick around at least until 9.